and it's a pleasure to be joining you this morning for this session using interdisciplinary project-based learning to assess grade level standards. Thank you for joining us. With that, I want to hand it over to our presenters to introduce themselves and jump into the presentation. Just a couple housekeeping notes. As we go through and you've got questions, please chat them in using the chat feature. We'll field those questions as we go. And then we'll also have some time potentially at the end to wrap up with some last minute questions. So thank you again for joining us, and I will hand it over to our presenters.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Cagle, and I am one of the 8th grade language arts teachers at Highlands Middle School.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Wolf, likewise, 8th grade language arts teacher.
Good morning, I'm the oddball, Stetson Steele. I teach 8th grade social studies.
Good morning. We are the other half of the presenters. I'm Andrea Shirey, I'm the instructional coach.
I'm Allie Bayermeister, Director of Teaching and Learning.
And I'm Mike Papirski, Middle School Principal.
Today we're excited to share our journey in project-based learning. We're going to share what went well, what we learned from the spring to guide us in our upcoming school year, and then we'll end with time for question and answer.
The bit.ly 2 at the bottom is for the presentation if you'd like to follow along. It's also in the materials that were sent out through Edmentum if you were in the general session earlier this morning.
Just a bit about our district. We are located in the Grange Highlands. We have approximately 950 students. We serve ECE through 8th grade. And what makes us a bit unique is that we are housed in one rather large building, meaning elementary, administration, along with the middle school.
So kind of an overview just to give you a little bit of context on how we got to this place. Obviously, we were all in remote learning from March through June. And we started out with an A/B schedule, and each content area would push out assignments to students. And we lovingly referred to it as the hamster wheel because we would push something out and then the assignments would come back in. And there was a lot of competing schedules and a lot of Zoom overlapping and teachers needing to be able to collaborate with students in a more authentic way. In April, early April, we moved to a project-based learning approach. And our 8th grade team, they were really awesome early adopters and had a lot of this collaboration and planning already in place as we moved as a district to project-based learning. So they're gonna tell you more about how they focused on the priority standards at the end of the year and used an essential question to guide their project-based learning and kind of what that looked like, what worked and what didn't work, and what we're gonna do moving forward.
First thing I want to mention, Mary Kinzel, our science teacher, is watching right now. Mary, it's good to see you. Mary, our science teacher, was part of this too. So when we started the project-based learning class, it was the 2 language arts teachers, social studies, and then science, and we worked together to develop the 2 projects that we're going to talk to you about. One of the first things we want to mention is right away for when we did remote learning in our own individual subjects, and then when we came together, we tried to keep practices for the students similar to what they had during the year. So we had bell ringers, we had daily agendas, we had weekly agendas, we had learning intentions set up for them. And we realized that some of those things needed to look a little bit different with remote learning, but nonetheless, the practices were the same. And one of the things I wanted to mention was Mrs. Cagle and I started doing weekly videos for the kids. We would push those out to the kids every Sunday, and it became a running joke between the 2 of us. We had to preview each other's videos. We had to have a contest almost to see who could put their video out first. And it was a great way for us to realize, are we getting the information out to the kids that they need to be successful through the course of both the daily task and then the weekly task in this project-based learning class.
To add on to that, we thought about practices that we currently did to keep routines the same, like Mr. Steele said, or Stetson, sorry. And then we thought about, okay, so sharing work. How are we going to share exemplary work? So we also shared some celebrations and highlights. We wanted to make sure that it was as routine, even though it's out of the norm and remote, for students to continue their learning. What you can see on this screen is one of the examples of what a learning intentions page would look like. So we had our essential question for the unit. We built relevance for the students. What's the purpose for the task that we're asking them to do? And then we aligned it with our content area standards, so they knew what they were working towards. We also included our success criteria, which helps to have that end picture in mind, because some of the tasks that they could choose were a little bit open-ended. So it had like that end point for them to know where they are in relation to their target.
So this is a look at the 2 choice boards that kind of got the ball rolling for project-based learning for us. Before we got into this time capsule choice board, we determined that the individual subject area instruction wasn't working as efficiently as it could, and we switched to project-based learning. So we had always used calendars for projects and unit endeavors in the past, and thought this was a great way to keep kids organized with dates and expectations and deadlines and things like that. So we chose this theme for our first choice board and our first project because we wanted to really engage the kids with what was happening with COVID at the time that it all really hit us as hard as it did. And we wanted the kids to have an educational opportunity to really experience, read news, talk about how they were feeling, reach out to others, put their work out there, and develop that sense of community with themselves and with teachers. And a lot of times it ended up in their own communities because they were, taking walks, writing on sidewalks, putting messages out, writing letters, and all kinds of neat things. Ultimately, we just wanted that connection back, and saw that taking on a COVID time capsule to kind of embrace and process what was going on and really treat it like a time capsule that they could keep for as much time as they ever wanted, and look back on with a sense of history and experience, and make it something meaningful in that regard. So we gave a lot of choices as activities that they could choose. We had different columns, and I think our first choice board, we required that students do one activity per column, and each column was themed a little bit differently. And then we had some free choice built into that as well. And then in addition, kids could come up with different ideas that weren't presented on the choice board that was an idea of their own and teacher approval, and we kind of worked to make it something that would work for the project. So we had 2 of these choice boards. The second became, a little bit more scientific in nature. We were able to get a lot of STEAM ideas and feedback from students to get even more academics built into the choice board the second go round. But every time it just kept getting better. We definitely wanted an opportunity to maintain long-term instruction while out of the classroom, and saw that this was a really nice way to do that. Like I said, on the second time around, we got feedback from students asking them what they wanted more of, saying more curriculum-based ideas, and we're able to do that on the second one. And then on the next project that we took on, it became a Holocaust project, which we'll talk more about next.
So we typically, again, going back to the idea of keeping routines the same, we typically at the end of units or at the end of projects ask for student feedback, which I'm sure many of us do. And it's interesting what Lindsay said, despite trying on our end, feeling like, hey, we have science choices, we have social studies choices, we have language arts choices. The feedback from the students was more, we don't see the content. And it really seemed to us was they were missing the science and the social studies content. So that's when we talked about, okay, we have another set of 3 weeks here. What do we want to do? And again, Mary, Lindsay, and Becky were very, very nice and accommodating. And they said, hey, let's run with the Holocaust, which is what I typically end the year with. And we look at the Holocaust as part of a bigger genocide unit. And let's take that content-specific material and make some projects out of it. So what we did was we used Anne Frank's diary and we used Eli Wiesel's memoir, Night, to base our next project around those 2 books. And we're going to talk about that project next.
Yeah, another thing about the reflections though, and it was such an important, we have it in our, like, what worked well for sure. It was such an important, guiding practice for us because this was all new to us and we were kind of jumping in, super excited at some things, but then the responses from students is what we really needed to hear. And so like Stetson said, content was definitely something moving forward in the fall we would want to improve. So like mini lessons specific to our content areas along with these more humanities-based projects. The other thing was the students still loved the options that they had. So we, which you'll see in the next slide, we incorporate choice in a similar manner, but it's just adjusted a little bit more. So it was more structured to our priority standards towards the end of the year. So the next slide we'll go to will be like an overview or a directions page that we crafted together as a team to once again build the relevance. We had our learning intentions page on our Schoology on our learning management platform. And then along with that, our dates scoped out.
So at the end of the year, as we reflected on what had happened during remote learning, we thought one of the most valuable experiences that we were able to build and help the students learn through was the interdisciplinary unit and aspect of this project. We definitely hope that that will be consistent as we move into this kind of unknown next year, and we're able to really embrace melding as many of the subjects and standards as possible, because it really was an effective way for the students to learn and us to teach and us to learn as professionals as well.
Yeah, there were quite a few checkpoints too. So surveys that were sent out at first. So what we wanted to do is just make sure we're supporting the student in the management of a long-term project. So we sent out surveys to see would they be interested in listening or reading or picking up a hard copy of the text, to just make sure that we always supported them in whatever path they took. Some students even emailed us to say, you know what, instead of listening, can I actually read Anne Frank's diary? And so we let those options, we let them have those options, but we wanted to make sure that we had built-in checkpoints throughout.
One other quick thing too, Anne Frank's diary, kids were able to listen to that. And then Night, we found a PDF of it. And then we had students telling us they actually wanted a copy of the book. So Allie is in my room digging around through all my cupboards, finding copies of the books, and students actually swung by the school and were able to pick up a copy of the book. So it was nice that kids were able to read or listen in a format that was comfortable for them and the way they learn.
So for the genocide unit and choice board, we gave a choice of 4 projects that would culminate the reading or listening of the different material that they chose. One of the first options, based on having read or listened to the Diary of Anne Frank, the play that was based on her diary, or some students, like was mentioned, read the actual diary. Students could choose the engineering project where they would engineer a floor plan of a room in which a specific amount of people had to hide and all needs were accommodated for. And a lot of thought and planning went into making a different floor plan that was kind of in line with what Anne Frank's experience was during her time in Amsterdam.
And then the other thing about the choices, I think I've done a lot of projects where you feel like there is one project that all the kids kind of gravitate to. I think it's fair to say for this, we had great variety, not only in the kids' choices for the projects, but the way they then decided to present that project to us. And that leads into that second one, the map. If you've read Eli Wiesel's memoir, you know that he travels to many different camps and experiences many different things. And so one of the things we wanted to give kids the chance to do was visually show what that journey looked like. And some kids did it old-fashioned on a piece of paper. Other kids used Google to map that out with pictures and interactive pieces to that. So that was a really cool way for kids to not only show his journey, but use a format that was comfortable for them. And then the third one, like I mentioned, normally in social studies, we tie the Holocaust in with other more modern day genocides like Rwanda, like Darfur. And so we allowed the students to research a modern day genocide and kind of compare what happened in these more modern day genocides to what happened in the 1940s with the Holocaust.
The last student option was to recreate a scene from the play that was either read or listened to. And this was a cool opportunity because so many iterations of the stage and play have been put on screen. So kids were able to, if they chose this, kind of see on YouTube different versions of the play and then recreate those with their family. A lot of kids use their family members and set up a scene at home and act it out as something short from the actual play with lines of dialogue and what have you. And it was a neat option to be able to extend that to the students.
Throughout the process, throughout their reading, we had, originally there were like chapter questions that we wanted to check in to make sure that students were staying on track to finish their novels. And then we decided to go the reader response route where it's more about their thinking about the text. And so we checked in with them through reader responses. Also with these final projects, we early on asked them what they were most interested in. So we knew who was going to do a scene or a hidden room. And then they were expected to submit a draft where we gave them actionable feedback to make tweaks, to adjust, and then they had an extra week to submit their final draft. So we made sure to embed those check-ins throughout the process.
And one of the big pieces to doing these books as part of this unit was we wanted to still have a book discussion, which would normally take place in the classroom. And along the way, Mr. P, our principal, kept talking to us about wanting to get more kids involved in the Zooming process. We had a kind of a standard group of kids that would come to our weekly check-ins, but we wanted to get more kids involved outside of that kind of norm group. And so we decided, let's try the idea of doing required Zoom calls for these book discussions. So we did 2 of these, and we actually broke into groups. Lindsay and I took a big group of kids, and then Mary and Becky took another group of kids. And we'll tell you in the next few slides that this is one of the things we definitely want to improve on. We did not get 100% participation, but what we did get is we had kids participating that I don't know if they would have participated the same way had we been in person. So the variety of kids that showed up to these discussions was great for us. And it was also very, very cool because the kids that did show up, they were absolutely invested in the books they were reading. They were invested in the content, and they had great ideas to share. One of the things that I really liked about this process was I've done book discussions in my room, but it was great to do book discussions with 2 language arts teachers to see how they run those. And one of the things that Lindsay came up with early on was, and you can see it on this slide, let's put out 5 questions for the kids ahead of time so they know exactly what we're going to talk about. And that way they were more comfortable coming to this required call, knowing that they needed to participate and could focus on one of those 5 questions.
Yeah, to continue on that point, we had really taken on student discussion as an activity in our classrooms, all of us, throughout the year. So students were familiar with this, and we had always given the questions ahead of time. So preparation was solid, and kids weren't thrown curveballs, but still had an opportunity to really organically move through discussion and agree and disagree and add on and have new thoughts and questions pop up. So we wanted those questions to be, we wanted multiple questions, and we wanted the students to be comfortable and prepared with their thoughts on the questions ahead of the discussion, in addition to a requirement that they were able to cite specific content from the reading or the listening in the discussion as well, and make it more of a text-based evidence required conversation.
Yeah, and the last, with this slide, we just took a snapshot of what a calendar would look like, so you can see how we chunked the reading for the students. There were check-ins that we called them the required Zoom calls, but just, I think that was one huge element that helped a lot of students be successful was that it was trunked for them as they were working.
So from our perspective, as you can see on this slide, we felt that a lot of things went well. We just mentioned the Zoom calls with the kids, and that's something we want to continue working on as we move forward into the fall. One of the other things, though, that we started doing too was we did a weekly Zoom call with the 8th grade parents. And at first we set it up, and I remember talking to these guys, we're like, do you think we're gonna get any parents showing up? Maybe 1, 2, or 3. Well, I think we consistently had 15 to 20 parents showing up. And again, I think different parents each week, but we realized they had questions. They also wanted to make sure they understood what was expected of the students so they could help them at home. And so I think what we realized was that the Zoom calls with the students were important, but also the Zoom calls with the parents as well. To go along with that, the other thing that Mr. P encouraged us to do was not only email the kids, not only Zoom with the kids, but the kids we weren't hearing from, he said, pick up the phone and call them. And it was amazing when we did that, the discussions we had with the kids over the phone. It was amazing when you did that to see how kids responded, and they then jumped on board and did things. So I think a lot of it was about individually reaching out to kids and figuring out what can we do to keep them engaged. And one of the things you see on there right in the middle is we had 2 celebrations during this remote learning. We had a parade kind of right in the middle of it that parents raved about. And any parent that asked me about it, I said it was equally as beneficial for all of us as it was for the families. It was wonderful to see the smiles. It was wonderful to see the people outside. And then we were lucky enough, the 3 of us, Mary, our science teacher, and then 2 other 8th grade teachers, along with Mr. P, we went to every kid's house on graduation day, and we dropped off a diploma and a little goodie bag, and same thing there. It was absolutely meaningful for the kids, but it was equally as meaningful for us. And again, I think part of that was not only did we have a relationship established with them from the year, but we worked hard to continue that during the time of remote learning.
Another thing that went well through the project-based learning process was collaborative grading. It was a great move for us to switch over to a project-based learning course in Schoology, and all students were in there with all of us as administrators of the course. And then, similar to the discussions that we had about the texts, we were able to grade those same students. He would take an alpha slice and then I would, and we would switch off so that we would frequently see every student, but technically each assignment was graded by only one of us for half of the grade. And it was great to be able to bounce my thoughts off of him and vice versa on specific feedback that we had received or the product that was turned in from the students. And ultimately we were able to see all of them, but only grade some of them and make that as consistent as possible because it was split between the 2 of us.
Yeah, to kind of go off that, the actual feedback that we provided for the students was super powerful. Even though we didn't require them to resubmit, many students we saw take the initiative to take our feedback, rework their assignments, and resubmit. Feedback, once again, was so important, so powerful throughout this whole process. The feedback from the students, I think, changed our practice a lot as we moved throughout. And even moving forward, things that we're talking about this summer that we want to put into practice for, as long as we teach together, I think comes from what these students are saying, and it's something that is going to be ongoing for sure. Sure, I'll say, yeah, so obviously there's room for improvement, and there's things that we're discussing as a team. So participation, I think what was challenging, something we were trying to figure out is that it was a difficult time. And so we wanted to be cognizant of students' social, emotional learning and the struggles that they were going through at home, what they were dealing with, and then this balance of work in an accountability piece. So moving forward, I think we talk about how we do need to hold the students, accountable to high expectations because they can live up to those expectations, but also supporting, what's going on emotionally, I think is something that we can incorporate into our homerooms and, and throughout these things that we're learning, check-ins, phone calls. That was just something that we definitely needed to find a balance moving forward.
And I think to go along with that, and I think it will continue to be difficult, is trying to get 100% participation, both in terms of the work being done and the Zooming taking place. As you can see in the fourth bullet point, our hope and our goal is this fall to kind of move into a humanities approach with the 2 language arts teachers working with social studies. And I think by doing that, we will find engaging ways to get the kids to participate and keep them excited about both subject areas, whether we are face-to-face or whether we are doing things remotely.
And it was almost shocking how similar our standards really were once we started to look at a common learning intentions document for these projects, that it was really uncanny how many things we do that are so in sync with each other, and the potential that we could really generate when coming up with these ideas. Anything else here?
I think we're good on that. Okay. Allie, Andrea, Mr. P, anything on that?
No.
So before Becky talks about this, I'm going to give Becky all the credit for this. Becky did a wonderful job. She mentioned earlier, we all, when we were in person, we all celebrated student work. I always joke with my students when my room is all whiteboards, something's not right, because I like to have stuff in my room, up in my room, and usually that is student work, exemplar work from the student. So Becky then worked on finding a way to not only share the student work, but share it with them and others within the district so they could see it. So I'm gonna let Becky talk about what she put together to share the work.
So this is just a screenshot of the website. We have the attachment. And this, so it was kind of a progression. At first it was, how can we share what students are doing, because we were so blown away by the projects that they were submitting, so proud of them that we wanted to continue to share exemplars. So it started off with just like YouTube videos shared out to just our students. This website was shared to parents because we thought, when we would have those parent meetings, some parents didn't know what their child was working on. And so we just wanted to really celebrate all the learning that was going on. We totally understand that it was difficult for a lot of students and families, but there's still room to celebrate. So this website just kind of has some reader responses that we thought were outstanding, where students were still working on the skills that we had incorporated all year. And then at the bottom of the website, there are just links to some of the celebration videos. They're just kind of, there's some music in the background and just clips of what kids were doing, but it was all so great. At the very bottom is just a celebration to, as a team, we put together a silly video just to let them know that we do miss them and we think about them every day that we're not with them. And so it was just a way to kind of compile everything together in one place. The last slide that we have is just to share any templates that anyone wants to use and make copies and kind of reference what we had, what we thought worked. And so just kind of everything all in one place. Andrea has created a Google folder where everything is there for you guys to access. I know I always like things to take away, even if you alter it completely. But it's just things that really worked well for us. And then
we have 25 minutes left, so we're hoping that you have some questions for us.
Yeah, and we don't have all the answers,
right,
but we
sure.
we definitely would love to, even have a think out loud or something like that with anyone that would like to kind of chat.
Yeah, hey, I'll just jump in here real quick. There hasn't been a ton of questions, but we did receive one question in regards to a link to the presentation. I presume Summer is referring to the this particular the presentation files. Is that going to be something that's going to be made available?
The actual presentation?
Yep.
I'm going to add it in the chat right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can you speak at all to how you coordinated, since obviously we're having to coordinate off-site, how did you collaborate with each other?
Yeah, a lot of Zooming. I think we went back and forth for a while with phone calls, but I think ultimately we resorted to Zooming to get things set up. And I think we were lucky that all of us, and again, Mary Kinzel included, are kind of forward thinking and not wanting to get behind the 8 ball. So I think we really worked hard to stay ahead of where we were with the students so that nothing was coming up kind of last minute. So Zoom, I think, was the main way we talked to each other and planned.
Yeah, we also just collaborated on like a Google document. So like if we were not available at the same time, we had a document started, and even like with that, the first choice board document. So we were all able to go in and add something that would be specific to our content area, hyperlink anything. It was a whole big mess. And then we went in and picked out the things we wanted to share with the students. So Google Docs was a lifesaver. We had our team meetings, like Stetson and said, via Zoom, and then kind of just like delegated, okay, you work on this, you work on this, or, you know, found a time to work on it if you needed a buddy to bounce ideas off of. But definitely Google Docs was a lifesaver.
We were Zooming on a daily basis.
For sure.
And then we were able to prep materials and prep the Zoom meetings with students that we had planned for later in the day. And then oftentimes even we would stay on Zoom meetings and kind of reflect on how things went and look forward to the next one. So pretty frequent Zoom meetings at first, and then they became a little less frequent as we got the ball rolling and just had, you know, less to figure out and just more to reflect upon.
I think the other thing too that we were very lucky is no one ever said no. Everybody was willing to, hey, I'll do this, I'll do that. No, I'll take care of it. So I think it was a great team effort. And I think, you know, I feel very blessed to work with people who absolutely want to say yes to help keep that ball rolling.
Awesome, thank you. And it looks like there was a question that was chatted in by Elizabeth. I was unable to start at my new school due to COVID. What tips can you give me for my final start date of August 10th?
Keep a smile on your face. Mr. P and I have talked about this. I think you can look at this whole situation as the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. And I think it's going to continue to be challenging this year, but I think you can take that challenge and make it fun and make it unique and try new things. That's what I think I liked best about this, was that I don't know if I ever would have tried some of this stuff if we wouldn't have been forced into this situation. So I think my best tip to you is be open-minded. And it's a great chance to try out things that maybe you've wanted to try but haven't been comfortable enough to try in the traditional classroom setting.
I think one of the things that helped us be successful for students was to really lean on each other. And we collaborated often, and we all have a great amount of respect for each other professionally, and we're able to really put our heads together and work hard and just lean in on one another to make it the best experience possible. So really utilize those professional resources that you have within your school community. Even Mrs. Shai was a huge help in generating ideas and helping us execute them from start to finish. Always as an instructional coach, that's her superpower. But in this regard, it was extra helpful because we were all doing it in a more challenging way. So really just leaning in and trusting each other and learning professionally from each other.
And I think the other thing realistically about leaning on each other is we all had a breaking point. And I think that's probably true for everybody watching this. At some point, we all had a I'm done, right? Lean on your friends, because ultimately these are my colleagues, but more importantly, they're my friends. And I think you have to use that support system because it is tough and you need people to lean on. So.
Awesome, thank you. We do have another question here. What strategies did you use to facilitate productive book talks via Zoom in terms of having kids pop into discussion without talking over each other and so forth?
Yeah, I think that, well, that's a great question. Like Lindsay mentioned, it was, so having class discussions, we worked on a rubric this year, and it was something we practiced all year about, those cues when it's your turn to speak, when there's the lull in the conversation. But Zoom is a whole other, element. And I think it was just, you could tell the kids that would Zoom with us on a regular basis before our quote required Zoom calls, there was more comfort in the more times that they Zoomed. Even for us, I think for like team meetings, it was super uncomfortable to sit and watch yourself talk to your colleagues. But I think the more practice, the better. I think moving forward, I think about this a lot is just like setting up classroom expectations. What are my expectations going to be for Zoom calls in the beginning of the year? What are we to use the chat bar for? And things like that. Or, how do you handle yourself, as a professional student, joining a Zoom call? What images do you have? Those kind of things. But I think it's all setting up those expectations in the beginning of the year. And the more we practice, the better we'll get at it, because it is awkward. It is, especially in the beginning. I don't know.
Each student knew that they would also have to talk. That was something that we made clear in the beginning of the Zoom call, that everyone will be expected to contribute at least once. And then we tried to moderate if anybody got too chatty or talked over someone, to your point, that we used the chat bar to kind of nudge them to be more respectful with their comments. But generally we did okay because we had the luxury of having done that all year. We just continued it on a digital platform. So this year's going to be different, and we're going to have to use more clear expectations and practices and really reflect on how things are going to make sure that we're getting the best quality time with our students as we possibly can.
I think the other thing too, Lindsay and I did the Zoom calls together, and Becky mentioned this, the first one, there were some awkward silences. And I'm the kind of person that I don't like that, and I want to jump in. It was like, just take a step back, they'll figure it out. But there were definitely moments where it was awkward. Lindsay mentioned this earlier. By the second one, I felt like it was a really organic conversation. And so much so that the two of us kind of took a step back, and it was one kid making a comment, another kid responding to that, another kid coming in. And that's what was so neat about it. And again, these were a great variety of students. And in some cases, students that in a face-to-face discussion might not have been as willing to participate. So it was, I agree that it takes time, it takes expectations, but I think just like anything in a classroom, the more you do it, the more kids will kind of come along and do it the way where they feel comfortable, and there's good stuff coming out of it.
Yeah, sorry, just to go back to it again, I think expectations are huge. I'm just kind of reflecting now. It's just a whirlwind of a time, but even like your expectations with like your phone next to you, and sometimes that was beneficial because they'd text their friend to say, come join on with the teacher. It's not that bad. But sometimes, they could be a little bit silly. But I think that's the whole balance, going back to like that social emotional aspect, because this is for some of them, the first time they were in a group with people, and it was exciting to see your friends. I know that's why we decided, instead of talking on the phone, to Zoom each other, or to FaceTime each other, because we needed that face-to-face interaction, So I think it just goes back to, like, as a team, I'm sure we're going to sit down and say, these are our expectations on our Zoom calls in the fall and moving forward. So something to practice. We could do a video on it. Yeah.
Take another video.
Great question, though.
Awesome. Thank you. We've got another great question here. Were the projects designed for individual students only, or were there opportunities for group work? What strategies do you have for allowing students to work together on projects in a remote setting?
Great question. So originally they were just because we figured that students were at home working independently. I think the majority were, but with family involvement, because we did survey like who was able to go out in their backyard, or that kind of thing. We didn't want to push anyone like out into the community. but it's definitely something, I have a feeling some asked
By
us
the-
to work together.
By
on
the second one, you referenced some of the videos the kids made. There were kids whose families were saying, hey, we can have some interaction. And I know there were some videos that were made together. I also think that kids continue to use Google Docs. I'm having a hard time right now personally remembering how many were done together, but I know that some kids did, and I know some kids use Google Docs to do that. And then again, some kids just got together and did the video piece too.
Yeah, I think a lot of them just messaged us. Like that was like, we wanted to celebrate that they had a lot of choice. And so whenever they were in doubt, they'd send us a message or pop on a Zoom call that we were on that we held regularly just to say, hey, is this okay for a project? Is it okay if I work with my friend on this? And we were always pretty flexible with that as long as they shared and they collaborated on the task.
Another idea for group work during remote learning is for partners or a small group to create podcasts together. We've had success with that in person, and I could see that transitioning pretty well to a digital platform because students shared a graphic organizer and they would plan out the content of their podcast. And then they, in a traditional classroom setting, would sit next to each other and record. That could easily be done by splicing audio together in different portions of a podcast. But students have really enjoyed that in the past, and I think would transition pretty well to a digital format as well. And we use those podcasts as a culminating activity often as a choice, in addition to something like an essay or a PowerPoint or a slides presentation or something of that nature, just as a way to talk through their thoughts and feelings about maybe an essential question or something of that nature after having read a book or completed a unit.
And not really a project, but we did have a group of students that, when given the option between reading night or listening to the diary, the theatrical version of Anne Frank, they reached out and said, hey, we'd actually like to read Anne Frank's diary. And so I think, was it 3 girls? There were 3 girls that actually did that. I can't remember if they actually did their project together, but they were working together reading Anne Frank's actual diary. So that was another way that the kids on their own found a way to, hey, let's work together on this.
Awesome, thank you. No additional questions at this point. We can continue to field those, chat those in, and we can hang out for a few more minutes here.
You want to show them?
Oh, yeah.
So if any more questions are coming in, just real quick on here, all of our contact information is here, both our email addresses and our Twitter handles. That's for the 3 of us. And then also for Andrea, who's the instructional coach, Mrs. Bayermeister, who's our director of curriculum instruction, and our middle school principal, Mr. Papirski.
We did get another question in here. Did every student participate in some way?
Yes. Yeah. So we did have, I would say everyone participated. We had a handful that unfortunately did drop off a little bit. We called regularly, emailed, tried really hard to get some of them back, but we just had to be aware that, you know, some other things were going on in families that were out of our control. Yeah, we did stop by everyone's house though.
Right.
Just once again, because no matter what was going on, we just wanted them to know that we were there. But I'd say by the end, what would you say, like 75%?
I'd say 75 to 80, yeah.
Yeah, 75 to 80% of our 8th graders were still invested, working through the tasks, the projects, communicating with us.
And I can't say this for everybody who participated, but when Lindsay and I, we graded together, I was really impressed with the continued quality of the students' work. And in some cases, I think I saw students whose quality of work when we were in person maybe was a step below the quality of work we were seeing here. And that could have had to do with the fact that they were more engaged in these two projects. It could have been the fact that, hey, I want to step up as I'm getting ready to go to high school. I'm not sure what it was, but I think all of us were impressed with the quality overall of the work that was turned in.
I completely agree. There were some students that I didn't even recognize. I even talked to Stetson about a student, and he's like, oh, I see that all the time in my class. And it was the quality of work was just amplified because of the engagement in the unit project. I think that for some of those that we lost, like, I guess I would call it buy-in at the end, those few that did kind of fizzle out. If it was something that whether we were going to be, remote or in person in the fall, what we would do is this humanities approach. I think like setting the expectations, we would have that buy-in throughout, and it wouldn't be looked at as just a project. And I think that's why it kind of fizzled out for some, but.
Right.
And that portion of students who we didn't have great production from is something that we want to focus on from day one leading into this next year, and really have strategies surrounding communication and encouragement and SEL to make sure that we get 100% and we won't let down until we've exhausted all of our communication and resources to get those kids on board.
And one of the things that, as we were driving around in that graduation parade, Lindsay came up to me and she said, this might be a good idea to start the next school year. So if for some reason we aren't face-to-face with students to start the year, we as a team have talked about spending a day going to each student's house, introducing ourselves, just to have that face-to-face contact that I think all of us would agree played a key role in kind of keeping kids going or kind of jump-starting them to get going again.
Awesome, thank you. Another question here, can you talk about resources online for listening to or reading books?
Our librarian had a digital library link. I don't have any specific information on that off the top of my head, but I think we could track it down. If anybody wanted to email any one of us, we could get that for you. But we have that option. Students with library cards to local libraries, that's not 100% of our population, but many of them had access to digital content that way. We did send home a lot of books, knowing that there was a possibility that this was going to turn into something longer than just a week or so. So we sent home as much as we could. We had the option, again, as mentioned before, Mrs. Bayermeister would run up to one of our rooms, say, hey, I need to set out 10 of these books and a few kids are going to swing by. We provided that option. We had a textbook with the digital file of the play. So we downloaded that and then made that available for students to listen to the audio of the Diary of Anne Frank play. But just being as creative as possible with our ability to find that content to push out to the kids digitally, a lot of YouTube.
The trailers.
Book trailers.
We found book trailers on YouTube that I think we wanted to use to hook the kids' interest. So I think it was some searching and some digging, but I think found it.
Yeah, we even teachers in our building, they recorded themselves reading. So I think to Lindsay's point, just being creative with how to make sure that the material is accessible to everyone is super important.
And
we also Newsella. We had Newsella and used that for a common resource as well, which again carried over from the beginning of the year since we consistently used it all year.
And the whole idea of working together, we had a student that wanted to do an art-based project, but had no art materials at home. So there was a day I was here in my room, and Miss Bayermeister was here, and she is down in the art room, digging through the cupboards, looking for art materials to find this for the student who then was able to put together an art-based project. So I think that's not a digital resource, but just the whole idea of, hey, use anything you can and work as a team to find those things that the kids need to be successful.
Yeah, I was just going to add on, a lot of times we just search for the PDF of books and they magically appear on Google. So that's one way. I put in the chat at the end of the year, we had a subscription, free subscription to Sora. But this year we're going to move into Access 360, which is through the Illinois Breeds program. So, but yes, we don't have a consistent platform that we use for the online listening or reading of books. We just do the best we can when we need to.
Awesome. Thank you. No additional questions right now, but we can hang out for a few more minutes. All right. Well, I think if there are no remaining questions, we will wrap this up, and just know that the resources will be available following the presentation, including the recording of this presentation. And thank you to our presenters here this morning. Very great information. We got a last minute question here. Is there any reason you didn't collaborate with math?
We found that the math collaboration was a little bit too forced, and our math teachers were not able to cover their content as thoroughly as they would have wanted to, given the choice board activities and the very differing nature of language arts and social studies and science at times, but science certainly lends itself more to math. So ultimately it was a school-wide decision to keep math separate so that routine of the instruction and the practice could remain as consistent as it was to the in-person instruction. So it was really just kind of a group call on the math department's part, and a request that we certainly wanted them to feel like they could deliver their instruction the easiest way possible. And it worked well.
Mm-hmm. And it was funny, we were coming up with math ideas that we thought would be good. And then we talked to the math teacher, and it was, well, we haven't covered that idea yet, or we still need to cover this idea to get to that. So like Lindsay said, it just, where they were at with their curriculum, it didn't really fit into at least the projects that we chose.
And I'll just add on to that. Each grade level, as the 8th grade team has talked about, they kind of collaborated to create their own projects. So at other grade levels, like in 3rd grade, they did a weather theme, and their standards went along with measurement and data. So they did hit a lot of their math standards with that one. So it kind of just depended on the priority standards that the teams needed to cover at the end of the school year, and what authentically fit and would keep kids interested and engaged.
And thank you for that. With that, I think we will wrap up this session, just so that there is enough time for everyone to get to their next sessions. So thank you again to our team to present this morning. We really do appreciate the time, and look for resources following the completion of today's webinars, and we'll send those out. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.